Frankenstein dog experiment. If you had a pet dog in the Soviet Union in the 1940s, a period where science was honestly just an excuse for cruelty, then you would have probably kept them under 24/7 house arrest because a mad scientist named Dr. Sergei Brukhanenko had the twisted idea to turn dogs into Frankenstein, the animal version. So any dog that is caught wandering outside the streets is in real danger of getting kidnapped and brutally experimented on. He and his team were obsessed with figuring out how to bring dead animals, specifically dogs, back to life. Plus, he also wanted to prove that a head can be kept alive without its body. So they started experimenting with something called the autojector, a machine that functioned like an artificial heart and lungs. Think of it as a really intense life support machine with a side of mad scientist vibes. They would cut off the poor dog's head and then try to keep it alive using the autojector. First off, removing a dog's head to try and keep it alive is pretty much the textbook definition of ethically questionable. The poor animals had no idea what was happening, and the fact that they tried to maintain basic functions like blinking or licking their noses while hooked up to this machine is both eerie and tragic. Now, these experiments didn't exactly lead to any scientific breakthroughs. Sure, they demonstrated that it was possible to keep some basic functions going in a severed head, but this wasn't the dawn of some new era of reanimation science. It was more like a terrible episode of a science fiction show that everyone would prefer to forget. The Harlo monkey experiments. Let's say you're a very young monkey who was just born a few days ago. You're still all around your mum, clinging and enjoying all that motherly warmth when suddenly some cold-hearted scientist literally kidnaps you. Sadly, this ordeal was basically the fate of several baby rhesus monkeys, and it all started in the 1950s when psychologist Harlo wanted to understand the bond between mother and child, specifically the emotional needs of infants. So, to get to the bottom of this, he decided to experiment on baby rhesus monkeys, because what better way to understand human emotions than by playing mad scientist with some adorable wide-eyed monkeys, right? Harlo separated these infant monkeys from their biological mothers just hours after birth and gave them a choice between two artificial mothers. One was a soft, cloth-covered mother that provided no food but was comforting to touch, while the other was a robot mother that had a feeding bottle attached to it but was as cuddly as a pile of coat hangers. Well, the results were both eye-opening and heart-wrenching because the baby monkeys chose the cloth-covered mother and desperately clung to it even when they were starving, and would only approach the wire mother when the hunger became unbearable. Imagine the torment of being forced to choose between the basic need to survive and the desperate craving for affection, like being trapped in a world where every bit of comfort comes with a price. But Harlo didn't stop there and even took this twisted game further by introducing what he called the Pit of Despair, a chamber designed to isolate monkeys completely for extended periods. As days turned into weeks, the monkeys in the Pit of Despair began to lose their mind due to the crushing loneliness. They refused to eat or interact, which turned them into ghostly shells of their former selves. The Dre's Eye Test. Chances are, you've mistakenly gotten soap in your eyes at least once or twice. If yes, then you will most certainly remember how painful and red your eyes got afterwards. Now imagine if someone literally opened your eyeballs and poured shampoo or liquid soap directly into them every day for the rest of your life. That's wild, right? Well, not according to toxicologist John H. Drees, who kidnapped rabbits and technically forced them to become unwilling participants in a beauty contest from hell. If you were unfortunately a rabbit captured for this experiment, a substance, be it shampoo, mascara, or some other chemical, is dripped directly into one of your eyes. The other eye is left untreated as a control because apparently even in rabbit torture there are rules. Your eyelid would be held open so you're unable to blink away the irritating substance. Over the next few hours, days, or sometimes weeks, the scientists would observe the effects of the substance on your eye, looking for signs of redness, swelling, discharge, ulceration, and other signs of damage. They would meticulously record how your eye reacts, all the while you're left with no way to escape the pain. The reason rabbits were commonly used is that their large eyes make it easier to observe irritation. and their lack of tear ducts means they can't easily flush away the chemicals. The worst part is that this isn't a one-time deal, so if the rabbit survives the first round, they would just keep repeating the test until their eyes were damaged. Two-headed dog experiment. If you were born in the Soviet Union in 1954, then you'd hear about a certain scientist named Vladimir Demikhov, who had a morbid fascination with organ transplants and reanimation. He was a pioneer in organ transplantation, and his work laid the groundwork for future medical breakthroughs, including human heart and lung transplants. However, before he got into the life-saving business, he ventured into what could be described as Frankenstein territory. His goal was to push the boundaries of surgical science by performing what was then seen as an almost unthinkable operation, creating a living two-headed dog. Basically, Demikhov would take a small dog, usually a puppy, and surgically attach its head, shoulders, and front legs to the neck of a larger adult dog. The two-headed dog would then be observed to see how long it could survive and how the two heads would function together. Both were alive and could see, hear, smell, and even eat independently, although only the head of the original dog had a functioning digestive system. Imagine waking up with an extra head on your shoulder, one that's hungry, scared, and entirely unnecessary. It's like a nightmare version of two heads are better than one. Forced swim test. Just imagine someone taking you to the middle of the ocean and leaving you there with no boats or land in sight. You're left to swim until you get tired and drown, literally. Sounds horrific, right? Well, this was the fate of all the poor rats used in the forced swim test experiment. The forced swim test typically involves placing a small animal, usually a rodent like a mouse or a rat, into a container of water from which it cannot escape. The container is designed so that the animal cannot touch the bottom, forcing it to swim to keep its head above water. The test usually lasts for a few minutes, during which the animal's behavior is observed and recorded. It was literally the animal version of sink or swim. The whole big idea behind this was to test for human depression. Still very confusing how they thought a rat drowning and a human being really unhappy were similar. Anyway, according to the scientists, the rats who gave up first exhibited depressive-like behavior, but the ones who remained resilient and continued to swim were considered to have more hope and happiness. Now, get this though. This test they do is even used to screen potential antidepressant drugs, so whenever the doctors got a new idea for a drug, they would take a bunch of rats, lock them up in a container filled with water, and give them the drugs to check who was depressed or not. Apparently, the effective antidepressant will reduce the time an animal spends immobile, encouraging it to keep swimming for longer. Well, the experiment was shut down after critics argued that the test induces unnecessary stress and fear in the animals, which can cause physical and psychological harm. Some questioned the relevance of this test to human depression because how do you even compare a rat not swimming after being forced to swim for hours with someone who has depression? Monkey head transplant. The name is exactly what Robert White, a U.S. neurosurgeon, did to tons of monkeys in 1970. The experiment would start when the guys would kidnap and decapitate two rhesus monkeys, one to serve as the donor's body and the other as the donor's head. The head of the second monkey was then surgically attached to the body of the first monkey, connecting the major blood vessels to ensure blood flow to the brain. The spinal cord, however, could not be reconnected, which meant the monkey was paralyzed from the neck down. Now, he did all this because he had a fascination for the brain and the possibilities of transplant surgery, and the goal was to see if it was possible to successfully attach one animal's head to another's body while preserving brain function. The surgery kinda worked because the monkey with the new head could blink, hear, see, and even taste, but because the spinal cord wasn't connected, it couldn't control its new body. It was essentially a functioning brain and head on a body that it had no control over. Therefore, the monkey's quality of life was extremely poor, as the animal could not move or breathe on its own and had to be kept alive on a ventilator. Fortunately, the experiment was cut short after a few days when the monkey died due to immune rejection. The body rejected the foreign head, much like an incompatible organ transplant. Topsy the elephant. Even though this sounds like the name of a kid's cartoon on Nickelodeon, Topsy the Elephant is sadly the case of a star elephant who spent all her life performing in a circus where she was severely maltreated, poked, prodded, and beaten with sticks and poles by her handlers, all for entertainment. As a result of years of abuse, Topsy became increasingly difficult to manage, and by the early 1900s, she was deemed dangerous and difficult to handle after she got involved in several incidents, some of which resulted in the deaths of her handlers. As her reputation as a bad elephant grew, the circus decided that she should be put to death. And the worst part is that they decided to make a spectacle of her death because apparently the circus needed one last showstopper. Well, the story gets worse because the method chosen to execute Topsy was electrocution, a conclusion that was reached because two rich men named Thomas Edison and Nikola Tesla wanted to prove the future of electricity. Edison argued that alternating current AC was dangerous, and by using it to electrocute Topsy, people would see just how dangerous it was and stick to his version, direct current, DC. It was an act of public spectacle as much as it was an execution designed to sway public opinion against AC. Sadly, on January 4, 1903, Topsy was fed carrots laced with cyanide to ensure she would not resist, and then electrocuted with 6,600 volts of alternating current. Edison's technicians filmed the horrific event, and the footage was later titled "Electrocuting an Elephant." The most annoying part is that today nobody even knows what a DC is because Tesla's AC still won the fight. So Topsy's execution was just unnecessary in every aspect. Human-monkey hybrid. The theory that humans evolved from monkeys is probably one of the reasons why Soviet biologist Ilya Ivanov decided that the best way to spend his days as a scientist in the 1920s was to forcefully impregnate chimpanzees with human sperm. Apparently, the regular science wasn't creepy enough for him anymore. Well, he was backed by the Soviet Union because they hoped such an experiment could bolster Soviet scientific prestige. Of course they did. Basically, Ivanov attempted to inseminate female chimpanzees with human sperm, but these experiments were unsuccessful. The procedure itself was invasive and cruel because the poor female chimps were treated like mere vessels for this grotesque experiment and made to go through all sorts of discomfort and pain in the name of science. They would be drugged, tied down, and then loads of sperm pumped into their bodies. The crazy doctor even tried experiments to inseminate human women with ape sperm, but that was shut down fast. Thankfully for the monkeys, and probably for the rest of humanity, none of the experiments worked and no human-monkey hybrids were born. But not before the poor chimps had endured months of unnecessary pain and stress, all because one man couldn't keep his crazy scientific curiosity in check. Find more entertaining and educative stories by simply joining our Discord server today. Military pigs. If you're imagining pigs wearing military gear and fighting wars, well, scratch that because the reality is actually way worse. Basically, the term military pigs means that pigs have been used as stand-ins for human soldiers in various military research and experiments. Now, pigs have physiological similarities to humans, particularly in terms of skin and organ size, making them useful models for studying the effects of trauma, such as burns, explosions, and gunshot wounds. Then, researchers would study the effects on the animals and test various medical interventions, such as new surgical techniques, wound treatments, or drugs designed to mitigate the damage. These experiments aim to improve battlefield medicine by developing better ways to treat injuries that soldiers might face. However, the injuries would be so severe and painful to the pigs, and they were euthanized when their suffering was deemed sufficient. You see, the use of pigs in such experiments has sparked significant ethical debates. Animal rights groups and concerned citizens have criticized these practices as cruel and inhumane, arguing that the suffering inflicted on the pigs is unjustifiable, especially given the availability of alternative research methods. However, this is still an ongoing practice because the military genuinely believes these pigs were helping save lives by dying in some of the most painful ways imaginable. After all, nothing says hero quite like being blown up, shot, or gassed for the sake of better battlefield medicine. Elephant on LSD. This is the very sad story of a gentle elephant named Tusko. It all started in 1962 at the Oklahoma City Zoo, where Tusko called home. However, this quickly became a horror movie for the elephant because a group of scientists decided to inject the creature with 297 milligrams of LSD at once, which is about 3,000 times the typical human dose. Their stupid reason for this absurd experiment was to see if they could induce a natural state of aggression in the 12,000-pound creature. Why would they even want to see an elephant angry in the first place? Well, sadly, they got their wish because the result was pure chaos. Tusko immediately went berserk, trumpeting wildly and thrashing around like it was running mad before collapsing to the ground. His massive body was racked with convulsions, and within an hour, Tusko was dead. Just like that, an innocent elephant's life was snuffed out in a twisted experiment that had no real scientific purpose and a tragic ending. After the tragic incident, the scientists tried to claim that the dose was too high or that they didn't expect such a reaction. But honestly, what did they think would happen when you inject an elephant with enough LSD to send a whole festival crowd into orbit? It turns out elephants don't appreciate acid trips, and they certainly don't survive them. The Silver Spring Monkeys. This real-life horror story starts in the early 1980s at the Institute for Behavioral Research in Silver Springs, Maryland, when a group of macaque monkeys were subjected to what can only be called the cruelest animal experiments of all time. So, Dr. Edward Taub, a neuroscientist who was interested in figuring out how the brain could rewire itself, basically wanted to see if he could teach an old monkey new tricks. But instead of just playing fetch or teaching them to press buttons for treats, Dr. Taub had a different, much darker idea. He intentionally damaged the nerves in the arms of these poor macaque monkeys so they couldn't feel anything in their limbs. Then, as if that wasn't bad enough, he restrained their healthy arms so the monkeys would be forced to use their numb, disabled limbs. Imagine someone tying one of your arms behind your back and then poking the other one with a stick to see if you'd react. But it gets even worse because the monkeys were kept in tiny, dirty cages with little to no care. Some of them developed severe injuries and infections because they couldn't feel or move their limbs properly. Well, fortunately, a young animal rights activist named Alex Pacheco went undercover and took pictures and videos of what he saw, and then he blew the whistle. The pictures went viral, leading to the first ever police raid on a U.S. research facility.